when I was an undergraduate doing philosophy and computer science, I thought Christianity was for people who were afraid to ask penetrating and difficult intellectual questions. I thought it was sometimes a place where people hid from the world, and it didn't have a lot of credibility in my mind. But I went on a bit of a journey as I did philosophy, and my perspective changed hugely. And I'd love to tell you a bit more about that. Perhaps we'll ask more about that in the questions if you'd like to hear more about that. But today I'm addressing the question, is religion still relevant in today's society? In a world with many problems, is faith and religious belief still useful? Hasn't the scientific outlook assumed the status that religion used to have? And doesn't the post-pandemic world have no need for God anymore? Perhaps we should just sweep the church one last time and then turn off the lights. I want to make two main points today for you to think about. First point is, if Christianity in particular can help us make some sense of the challenges that we face in the world that we're up against today, then it could be said to be meaningfully relevant. Second point I want to make is, Christian faith is a highly relevant framework for understanding our world, ourselves, and our place in it. And I'll come to that a bit later. First of all, what does it mean to be relevant? When something is relevant to us? Well, there's a straightforward answer here, the anthropological kind of answer. Religion shapes people in all kinds of ways, and so yes, it's relevant to think about how religion affects people and impacts life. The social sciences have long understood and will continue to understand the relevance of religion in the task of describing and predicting human behaviour. There is, however, I think, a more meaningful sense of the word relevance and the question about relevance, the more interesting way, perhaps I might call it. And this is when something is closely connected or appropriate to what you're thinking about and what you're doing and what you're facing. It's relevant when it's needed to get us through an obstacle or a barrier in our lives. The question of whether or not religious faith is relevant in this way is the far more intriguing puzzle here. I'm not going to attempt to claim or defend the claim that all religion is relevant in this second way. I'm not going to do that. Instead, by the way, I don't have slides, it's just me, sorry. So I'm not going to try to argue that everything that happens in the name of religion or in the name of Christendom, Christianity, is relevant in this way. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens in religion, and there's even weirder stuff that happens in churches and in Christianity that frankly I have no explanation for. But instead, what I want to tackle is, I want to cut right into the issue, and I want to ask the question, does the cross, the central message, the central event in the life of the central character of Christianity, is that topic relevant? There's no Christianity without the cross. The cross is the central idea, the central thesis, the central action, and the central moment of Christianity. The theologian John Stott said, what dominated Christ's mind was not the living, but the giving of his life. So, we are going to ask now the question that takes us right into the middle of the question, the issue. Is the cross relevant to life now, in our day, in our age, in our moment? Now, when I say the cross, for the purpose of this, I mean the combined event of the crucifixion, the life, the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. I'm really thinking about those three different elements, the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ, of the historical person of Jesus. I'm not also today making a historical evidential case for Jesus' existence or for the truth and accuracy of the claims about the resurrection. You're very welcome to look at a website called bethinking.org or to look at a website called the OICCU.org, where if you follow a link to Big Questions, you'll find an article and a series of discussions about the question of history, who was Jesus? And that's a very important foundation of the relevance question, but it's not what I'm exploring today. But it is relevant to ask, is it real, is it true? Now, it might seem a bit strange to say that the cross is connected to what we're doing now in our 21st century existence and lives. We might hear this suggestion and we might say, well, look, we've got science now, we're beyond religion, we're beyond the cross, it's just not needed, it's not necessary for anything anymore. And you can have the same sort of impression if you look out of a window in any modern city, any town or city, and you see everyone going about their business. You see life happening. You see everything's just fine. And what can strike you is that it's all happening in a completely oblivious and seemingly unaffected way to the story of the God who may or may not have died in a distant land 2,000 years ago. Is the cross as irrelevant as it can seem in moments like that, when we see that? So what are the challenges, first of all, and how does the cross meet them? So starting with the bigger picture, the social global sphere. According to ChatGPT, the biggest questions that face humanity at the moment are climate change, social and economic inequality, political instability, pandemics, conflict and violence. My list goes a bit further. I would say that security and safety, war, is an extremely important thing for us to talk about, particularly as what we've been watching over the last couple of years. But thinking further back, over the last 100 years, 2 weeks ago I was visiting and looking around Auschwitz, and it strikes you at those moments where we see what happened in the past, that war is an absolute terror. War is horrific. Global war now is perhaps closer than it has been for 2 or 3 generations. There's also biological risk in our world. We've just experienced a pandemic, and we may experience more. There are diseases and biological risks that assail humanity and that confront us and that we need answers to. We also see the instability of economics and markets. The economical story, or the sort of economist the dream that we're often offered is, look, if you work hard at school, you'll get good A levels, and if you get those good A levels, you'll get to a good university, and if you get to a good university, you'll get a good job, and then you'll be able to afford a nice place to live, and you'll be able to have a good life. But as economies falter, and as interest rates go up and down, and that dream sometimes has looked a little bit ragged, and it's only, perhaps concrete in a few places. I mean, it's largely kind of working, but when it wobbles, we perhaps reflect. Then there's issues of corruption and leadership. We badly need leaders who can act wisely and morally. We need to be free from tyranny. In many countries, leaders have been in power, presiding over oppressed and mistreated people for decades. There is the issue of international slavery and trafficking, which is more present in our age than it was in Wilberforce's day. Our public discourse is largely polarised and balkanised. Conversations about important issues like climate crisis, refugees, ethics, racism and reform of inequalities are all fairly bogged down, fairly stuck. And then there are also the personal challenges which I think connect to some of these things, that don't just remain at the individual level, the need to find love in our lives, the need to find community in an increasingly individualistic and materialistic world. We find ourselves sometimes looking for love in a world where character isn't always the thing that's closely in focus, and that we live in a culture where we're pretty silent when people are betrayed, used, mistreated, or hurting each other. We see every night and every day on the news that human nature is not good, not great. 2 days ago, a man burst into a park in Annecy and started stabbing toddlers. What is going on? We also don't have moral clarity, ethical decisions, making sense of what evil is, even using words like evil, which incidentally is interesting. When you walk around Auschwitz, that word is used much more than I've heard it used in some philosophical discourse, and it actually feels right to use it when you're walking around Auschwitz. But we don't have moral clarity in our modern world. We don't always know what's right and what's wrong. And then we as human beings face the challenge of answering the big questions of life. What's my purpose? What's my identity? Who am I? And who are you? And what can I hope for? And what will bring relief to our state of suffering and alienation that we sometimes experience. And we also are confronted with our own mortality and our own aging and death. Now, this is a rather happy picture, I grant you. You might actually find French existentialist literature uplifting compared to thinking through these sorts of topics. But I mean, this is the reality of the challenges that human beings face in the 21st century, is it not? This is the picture. This is what we are confronted with. These are the issues you will be working at and against and towards, kind of trying to solve and do something about if you're interested in making a difference in this world. In his book, The Critique of Pure Reason, the philosopher Immanuel Kant posed three of the great questions for humanity. He said, what can I know? What may I hope for? What should I do? And what can I know? I think these three questions refer to three broad categories or spheres of ongoing human experience and difficulty. I take the first question, what may I hope for, to be concerned with the domain of the aspirational, the future. The present, yes, but mostly what's going to happen in the end and what will happen to us going forwards. What will happen to my three children as they grow up in this world? The second question, what should I do, refers to the ethical or the moral sphere. As I've started to discuss the issues around human nature and the difficulties in finding transformation of human nature. And the last question I take to be, what can I know, to correspond with the realm of perception, epistemology, phenomenology. How can we see clearly what is happening in the world? A question of the last few days was, who blew up that dam in Ukraine? Who is doing these things? Can we see clearly where these things are coming from and where the power is and how it can be challenged? We often do not see clearly, and that's part of our greatest challenge. And when we say nobody is an island, I think we mean that we exist and we live out our lives amongst other beings, and that we're influenced and influenced, and that our collective social health and sickness, our stability or our instabilities, our integrity or our corruption, our action or our inaction, is in some way tied to and related to our individual states. So I'm going to use Kant's three questions, what may I hope for, what should I do, and what can I know, as a structure to open up three domains, which are not only issues of highly personal relevance, I think, but they're strongly connected to these global challenges and bigger challenges that I've started to list off. And the basic idea here is that insights, any insights from any sphere, the sciences, from literature, from philosophy, from theology, from religion, or from the arts, that connect with these questions and challenges that arise from these modern human needs to have answers to these questions, takes us right to the middle of things and would be relevant. Now, we're likely to find also that those answers are highly stimulating. So, if the core event of Christian faith, if this moment, the cross, were able in some way to draw out a kind of honesty or a kind of clarity about humankind's predicament, and if it were able to connect with these issues, then this would be something very relevant, I think. So let's consider the three spheres in a little more depth. So Kant asks, first of all, what may I hope for? I think hope is linked to the imagination, the ability to conceive of or imagine a better world, a better future, a better destiny. A clear-eyed, non-naive, but sincere sense of hopefulness that could be lived out in the context of modern life. Now, being hopeful while being able to see the world is unusual. Normally we sort of, a little bit of a kind of rose-tinted spectacle in order to be hopeful. But this is a kind of invitation to think about whether we can have hope that sees pain and suffering and difficulty. What we hope for doesn't actually have to be a big miracle for it to make a significant difference to our lives. And we hope for all kinds of things quite regularly, quite frequently. I remember hoping at school that I would pass my exams. There wasn't much hope of that at that point. But maybe you're hoping to get a particular grade, to get a particular job or a career, or to pursue a particular relationship. Our hope can be about getting those certain achievements, but it can also be about love. We want real friendship, real intimacy, someone who knows us, someone who wants to be with us, and who won't find us boring or unattractive or uncool at some point. A friend told me a few days ago that she once dated a guy who used to buy yachts, cars and things to make himself feel a little bit more alive. We can project that desire onto a new gadget, a new situation, a job or a status in the world, but it could be driven by a deeper longing here. C.S. Lewis talked about the idea of longings or desires driving our behaviour and what we do in the world. Sometimes we can just feel stuck in our circumstances. We hope for a different situation. I remember talking to a friend who told me that when he travels and meets people in different countries, he asks them the question, do you want your family or your children to stay here in this place? And it was quite revealing to listen to their answers. If they didn't have much hope for their country, they would say, no, I want them to go somewhere else, I want them to escape, I want them to be elsewhere. Now, remaining hopeful can be quite hard fought when there are mental health challenges around us as well. And before we went into a global pandemic and came out the other side of that, levels of anxiety were already peaking at higher levels. The isolation that was caused by the pandemic cut people off from personal contacts, which helped to alleviate pressure beforehand. Relationships are good for alleviating those pressures, and many people found they couldn't see those people or have those relationships. And despite us living and growing up in the greatest period of peacetime in Western Europe, many people, particularly younger generations, are reporting feeling apprehensive and fearful about the future. And employers now talk more about resilience and mental first aid training than they do often about the skills that people coming into the workforce have. I was talking to a banker a couple of days ago, and he was telling me that the main challenge with new graduates is to get them to actually commit and not to run away from challenge. Very capable people, but struggling with maybe engaging in a way in the world. A factor in this could be communication technologies and the internet. A head teacher in a London secondary school told me that when there's a high school shooting in the USA, thousands and thousands of miles away, in no way connected with a school in London, they have to bring in pastoral support and counselling for the students in London because they're so affected by what they see through social media and through the digital. Every single generation, recent generation, has been touched by the difficulty of living life when you struggle to hope that things will improve. So the theologian Peter Kreeft says, the deepest hope of the human heart is heaven. I wonder if this is because heaven is the only world which we tend to imagine which doesn't include death. Death is the big hope crusher, and a good consensus of psychologists and sociologists, people like Ernest Becker, have identified death as one of the greatest fears of 21st century human beings, even if we're not aware of it all the time. They say it's there. So if hope is held alongside what we fear, and what you fear is stronger, then it's quite hard to feel hopeful or very hopeful. What's the best option on the table? What are the different offerings from the world to confront this issue and this question of how we can have hope? Well, I give you transhumanism, atheism 2.0. It offers us the tools to create our own source of hope through technology. Transhumanism is a philosophy, it's an ethical theory, and it's a view of human beings, an anthropology. It's the idea of unrestricted human progress and that we must take control of our own evolution and direct it through using technology. And transhumanists would advocate the use of technologies like AI, robotics, implants, cyborgs, nanotechnology, mind scanning and splicing and uploading, genetic engineering, as a way of bringing hope and a way of overcoming our biological limitations like aging and like death. That's one of the best options on the table at the moment. How does the cross begin to confront some of this? How does the cross speak to this question of hope? Well, Christ confronts the fear and reality of death with his cross. The shame and the pain of humanity is transformed through Christ's death on the cross, through Jesus' death on the cross, and that's transformed into the hope of a new friendship with God and a new future. And people now can move from searching for hope, alienated from God, far away from God, to a new status, equipped with the possibility of a future resurrection and a new life ahead of us, who have an answer that speaks to their deepest fears of death and of being alone. Now, when Christ comes back from the dead, if that's true and real, then that's the most hopeful news that has ever been told, ever. A personal, ongoing, life-giving, death-silencing, shame-busting friendship with God must be available if Christ has come back from the dead. The story here is that there's a new world breaking in. That's what the cross is in part. It's a world breaking into a broken world. It's God's world breaking in. And this new world doesn't include suffering and death. It's a world that rescues through Christ's death on the cross. And this is highly relevant, I suggest, to anyone searching for a real and true hope. Kant's second question, I'm going to speed up a little. What should I do? This concerns the moral domain or sphere. What does this mean? It's the area of right and wrong, the nature of the grounding of moral values and principles, the apprehension and the understanding and the cognition of right and wrong, as well as the applied systems that we use in difficult medical situations. It's the domain of our moral conduct, together and as individuals. How should we treat each other? How should we behave? How do we behave? Why do we behave as we sometimes do? Is this, like hope, also a pressing need for 21st century human beings? Is right and wrong relevant now? Well, human beings and the evils they do to each other has been one of the greatest sources of suffering and destruction in all human history. Now, futurists speculate that one of the greatest challenges to the survival of human beings in the future, apart from AI, is what will we do with the new weapons and technologies that we will surely make in the future? This is not just a technological, but it's also a moral question. Every few days, the news reports to us another urban mass shooting. Our security services are hard-pressed to keep a lid on the radicals and the extremists who threaten to rampage through our cities and capitals, causing as much death and horror as they're able to. I've already mentioned the stabbing in the centre of Annecy a few days ago. Ken McCallum, the director of MI5, said that in 2021, 31 late-stage terror plots had been foiled over the last 4 years in the UK. The Office of National Statistics reported 600 homicides, murders in the UK. 1,500,074 violent incidences. 2,968 thefts during 2021. Human moral conduct, 2 million thefts, not 2,000 thefts. Human moral conduct impacts everything from wearing masks to markets. And we've been increasingly seeing the relevance of morality to markets and witnessed crashes like those that engulfed WorldCom, Enron, car emission scandals. Even at home now, I get phoned, as you probably do occasionally, by scammers who, with a lovely friendly sounding tone of voice, offer to help me with my computer or my online banking in exchange for giving them details about my bank codes and my numbers, and they're trying to literally steal money right in front of our faces. Human moral conduct has contributed to a loss of trust in political leadership. We've just seen a change of Prime Minister based on moral conduct, I would argue. We've seen expense flipping, press hacking. We've seen all kinds of impropriety. And instead of demonstrating a different ethic, I must be said here, the church and Christian ministry has often supplied further exemplars of the failure in moral leadership. Just 2 days ago, the Telegraph reported that over 100 victims have come forward reporting inappropriate behaviour by a Christian leader in a church in the UK. The church, the world, and our own experience lead us to an identical conclusion. Humanity is in a complete mess. Personally speaking, I see these same examples of moral failure, not exactly the same as I've been describing in my own life, but I find inside myself, as you may sometimes do, a struggle to do what's right, a reluctance to say sorry to my wife when I mess up, an impatience with my children when they ask for something. I find great comfort, actually, in the words of St. Paul, who says, "For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep doing." For me, this often isn't about knowing the right thing to do, but it's a tendency to hold back from doing the right thing. I don't think I'm completely alone in this perspective. Now, humanism offers us an opportunity to value human beings in an otherwise uncaring and unconcerned universe. However, the project of moral philosophy and ethics has in many ways failed. It's failed to define clearly what right and wrong actually are, what they're grounded in, and how we can experience moral transformation. Some are turning away from systems or frameworks and are instead looking inwards. The search for the truly authentic inner self now is more of the pattern and pathway that people are pursuing. But once you push past the nice-sounding and positive messages of discover yourself, reject those outside voices, question yourself, love yourself, it either becomes a kind of impersonal monism where everything is absorbed into just one substance that leaves you not existing, or it's a kind of different version of individualistic relativism or subjectivistic relativism, maybe with some ice baths and some funky breathing mixed in as well. This is the kind of thing that sort of, we see Russell Brand talking about. This is the best sort of transformation route that's being offered to us at the moment in response to human moral conditions. How does the cross speak to this question? Jesus invites people to receive forgiveness for their honest humility. He forgives people. Over and over again, when Jesus meets people, he tells them that they can be offered and can experience a reconnected relationship with God. And there are two sides of Christ's answer in this dimension. One answer is the cross. It's an indictment, a clear statement that something is badly, badly wrong with our world, that we're in real trouble. But the cross also tells us that Jesus and God have gone to real trouble for us. The cross is a profound diagnosis of human nature. It's saying there is something absolutely wrong. But it's also a deep declaration of God's love and his interest in us and the possibility of a transformative, slow, restorative friendship with God. The cross of Christ speaks to our 21st century struggle to recognize and actualize right living. It calls us out on our personal battles and our tendencies and drives, and it calls us to live in the light, in the open light. The cross delivers a series of relevant home truths too that Christ wants to communicate. We have a problem, but God has done what is necessary to deal with it. And the answer here is a friendship with God. It's a relational answer. And although many, many people understand Christianity to be about moral improvement, it's the precise opposite. It's about admitting moral shortcoming, regardless of effort, regardless of anything we think we can do to help ourselves or improve ourselves. We can't do it on our own. That's the starting point of Christian faith. Christ's cross tells each of us that he can change us, forgive us, and walk with us, and he offers moral transformation through friendship with God. This is the possibility that sits at the centre of the cross. Let me just finish quickly now. Kant's third question concerns our grasp of reality, the search to know, the desire to understand. We've gone to the bottom of the Marinara Trench, 6.8 miles underwater. We've sent probes into space. We've explored different parts of the universe, and we will continue to do. We've spent 4.7 billion on a massive particle collider under the Swiss-French mountains to help us understand questions in physics about mass and dark matter and the Higgs boson. We, as human beings, desire to know in a way that other animals and other creatures do not. Scientists, explorers, artists, poets, authors, and philosophers write books describing the current status of our knowledge in the world and trying to edge it further up the beach, trying to expand our grasp of things. Who are we? Where have we come from? What's this universe all about? Who or what is behind everything? What will happen in the future? And these are the questions that we are asking through our tools and through our resources. Now, the tool here that we use, science mainly, is not a bad tool, but it just isn't the only tool. And it needs a framework to rest in. I'm going to say more about that in a second, but I want to move now to this last question. So, how does the cross of Christ speak to these questions? Christ's cross addresses the gaps in our knowledge by declaring to us the one who stands behind everything. Through the cross, human beings can apprehend and can know true knowledge about themselves and the world they're in. We can actually glimpse through the cross what God is like, who the person that made us is. That can become a source of trustworthy and reliable information about God, inviting us to respond in trust and humility. I've already described how the cross is a rescuing hope, answering that question Kant has about what can we hope for, but it's also a transforming moral reality. God demonstrating what love looks like, other-centered sacrifice, inviting us into a transformative relationship with him, diagnosing what's wrong, and dealing with it, reconnecting us with God. And God reveals to us truth through the cross. He reveals his nature. He tells us about what he is like. So, first question, if Christianity can help us make sense of some of the challenges we're up against today, then it is meaningfully relevant. And we've briefly considered some answers to Kant's 3 questions, and I've started to fold the answers to those things back into some of the challenges societally and globally that we're facing. But secondly, I think Christian faith is highly relevant to life as it gives a framework for understanding our world, ourselves, and our place in it. To face any challenge in life, you need 3 things. You need a vision of what's going on, you need a plan to deal with it, and you need an actuality. When you actually do it, it works. Now, in terms of Christianity and its relevance to life, thinking about those challenges, it's going to work in different ways practically, but the picture of what's happening is that God is real. The world is real and meaningful. We have value. You and I have value. You're loved by God. I'm loved by God. And we're told what is wrong. A clear view of what the world is and what's going on. The plan is that the gospel event and message confronts and deals with what's wrong. The teachings of Jesus tell us how to know God, how to live a virtuous and peaceful life, and how to grow in compassion and humility in relationship with him. And the actuality of that is that actually we do see some alleviation of emotional and existential sufferings. The promise of alleviating suffering eventually. Friendships with God give us a personal, not an impersonal answer in our lives. And it helps to navigate life's challenges, which gives us resilience and hope and gives us a clear and tangible sense of purpose and meaning when we do things like science. So, the questions that we ask and the things that we wonder about are always relevant to us. If we find ourselves asking questions about hope, ethics, or reality, or some of these other bigger challenges, the cross, I put it to you, answers some of these questions in very profound ways. We do live in a world that needs hope, goodness, and truth. The cross confronts our deepest fears around shame and death, and through it, God offers us a hopeful, restoring friendship and relationship. The cross offers a way for human beings to experience moral transformation through holy friendship and forgiveness. And the answers from the cross are surprisingly challenging, but are not at all like the ramblings of a distant and disaffected old man in the sky, which is how we sometimes think of religion. The cross declares our value to God. It is the stunning declaration of God saying, you are wanted, I love you, I care for you. That you are known and loved, that God is real, and that a loving God is working through the pain and suffering of this world, that wrongs are seen and they matter to God, that there is a judgment and his justice is perfect. There is true justice and mercy. And through the cross, Jesus speaks to my worst fears. He deals with the worst parts of me. And he tells me the truth about reality. Now, Jesus promises to gently show us how we can live in freedom through this. He tells us that he loves us and that he's with us. Some of the most difficult questions that humanity is asking are intercepted by Christ's cross. And if religion means the cross, then what I've described to you, if that's correct, it's not just relevant, it's revolutionary. Thank you very much.